Which service is the best? Hey, I am Chuck the Bureaucrat, and today I'm probably going to touch a raw nerve, but I promise there is a legitimate strategic question at the heart of it all. If we set aside our parochial preferences, I argue that each military service provides a unique aspect of national military power. The Air Force proves that no matter how far you run, Uncle Sam can still reach out and touch you and, quite frankly, be home in time for dinner. The Navy can park 4.5 acres of sovereign U.S. territory just off your coast and pound you with a delightful array of weaponry. If that doesn't get the point across, the Marine Corps can Uber on over to your shores with 22,000 of the most intense Americans you're probably ever going to meet. Still not enough? The Army will fill your streets with so many dudes and dudettes that you'll start to think you're about to become the 51st state. And I didn't forget you, Space Force. I know. The whole time all of this is happening, you'll be screwing up their communications and breaking their internet with a coffee cup in your hand. But which of these is most necessary for national defense? Well, that has a lot to do with the types of conflicts that you expect to get into and how our national leaders intend to deal with those conflicts. And yeah, you could read the National Security Strategy and the National Defense Strategy and the National Military Strategy. I mean, somebody has to read them, but for me, I always like to turn to The Prince by Machiavelli. This book is basically an excessively long letter intended to prove that he knew how to advise a European ruler, a prince. And there are a couple of insights that always make me wonder about our balance of military capabilities. The first point that Machiavelli makes is that the people can either be treated kindly or utterly crushed. But if you just insult and injure them, well then they can take revenge. Secondly, he points out that the people will often seek to improve their lot in life. And in so doing, they're perfectly willing to change masters. And that's a warning because it means that the people will take up arms against any ruler at any time. So, on a strategic level, the question becomes, how do you use your mix of military power so that, number one, you either treat the people kindly or crush them utterly, and number two, and at the same time, make sure that they don't really see any benefit in taking up arms against you. In answering this question, Machiavelli makes a distinction between two types of territories that a prince might take over. On one hand, you have provinces that speak the same language and have the same laws and customs. And on the other hand, you have the provinces that don't. For the provinces that are similar to the prince's homeland, the prince is perfectly able to rule from afar. Only has to do two things. Number one, crush the previous ruling powers. And number two, don't change the laws and taxes. As a result, the prince can treat the people kindly and give them no reason to take up arms. Where things get tricky is when he is taking over some place that's fundamentally different than home. Machiavelli breaks down three big things that have to happen in this case. Number one, the prince should go and live there in person. I know it's unlikely that a U.S. president would go live in another country, but it's worth asking, who might do this task? The real reason this is important has to do with the second part. You have to be positioned to detect problems when they are just starting so you can fix them quickly. And the third point is that the prince has to make sure that the new province doesn't get pillaged or misused by his own officers. It's a fairly decent framework, but we've got to go back to the question of which military service is most useful for accomplishing it. I argue that if the only goal is rooting out the previous ruler, then the Air Force, with a little bit of help from Special Forces, is probably the answer. Some long-range operations, some surgical strikes, and bada bing, bada boom, you're done. If the real goal is to dwell there in person, well, then the answer is going to be the Army. Although Those of you who have read Machiavelli carefully will know that he has some serious reservations about putting too large of an army force into a foreign country. In particular, you have to be mindful that the army doesn't commit those small offenses that encourage the people to rise up in arms against the ruler. And then, well, where do the Navy and the Marine Corps fit into this? I submit that they are most useful as a standing threat against foreign rulers. They are highly visible and a likely first, if not final, military solution to any foreign leader who gets too frisky. But so what? I mean, aside from kicking the hornet's nest of service rivalries, what does it matter? Well, in particular, as you move through your military career, you're going to serve under different presidential administrations, different financial conditions, and different international threats. Each of these is apt to influence the military tools that the U.S. leaders reach to in a moment of crisis. And it influences the way that the service leaders attempt to prepare you for the uncertain future. If you want to see more about how the different services evaluate themselves and how they balance investments between force structure and equipment and readiness, watch this video. And if you're interested in a looming financial crisis that's probably going to influence your career, watch this video.